Poland is quietly blocking Ukraine's path to the EU, unless Kyiv admits to a massacre that killed 100,000 Polish civilians in 1943-45 buried for 80 years. I'm David. With Ukraine bleeding in a war it can't win alone, Poland has found the perfect moment to turn history into leverage. Here's how. Brussels works on a rule: nothing passes without everyone saying yes. One no can block the whole room. That's how small countries get big power. And right now, Poland, a country of 38 million people, is sitting in a position where a single word can stop Ukraine's path to the EU and NATO. Ukraine needs that path. Its military is bleeding. Its economy is hemorrhaging. Joining NATO means security guarantees. Joining the EU means access to markets that keep the war effort alive. Both require Polish approval. Both require unanimity. And Poland has something on its mind that Ukraine has spent 80 years trying to bury. Between 1943 and 1945, in a region called Volhynia on the Polish-Ukrainian border, approximately 100,000 Polish civilians were systematically killed by a Ukrainian nationalist military organization called the UPA, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. Mass graves still dot the landscape. Exhumations continue. And for Poland, this is not ancient history. It's a wound that's been reopened every single year. In memorial ceremonies, in parliamentary debates, in conversations that Ukraine has always worked to avoid. The question hanging over Brussels right now is whether Poland is finally going to demand that Ukraine acknowledge what happened between 1943 and 1945. To understand the leverage Poland is sitting on, you need to know what the UPA actually was and what it actually did. The Ukrainian Insurgent Army formed during World War II as a nationalist military organization. Its stated goal was Ukrainian independence from Nazi and Soviet occupation. But between 1943 and 1945, operating across Volhynia and eastern Galicia territories on the Polish-Ukrainian border, the UPA didn't just fight occupying powers. It systematically targeted Polish civilians. Entire villages were surrounded and destroyed. Families were killed in their homes. The massacres were organized, deliberate, and ethnically motivated, a campaign to clear Polish populations from Ukrainian territory. By the time the killings stopped, approximately 100,000 Polish civilians were dead. In Poland, this history is embedded in national memory. It's taught in schools. Memorials mark the grave sites. Annual ceremonies commemorate the dead. Exhumations continue to uncover mass graves decades later. But in Ukraine, the UPA has been reclaimed as a nationalist hero, a resistance movement against occupation. Statues were erected after Soviet rule ended. Streets and military units bear UPA names. The massacres, meanwhile, were minimized, disputed, or absent from official histories. This is the unbridged gap between two nations' histories. Poland grieves. Ukraine honors. For 80 years, they've talked past each other until now, when Ukraine needs something only Poland can give. But Poland's grief isn't confined to textbooks and memorial services. It's being dug up, year after year, from the earth. Exhumation teams continue to work Volhynia's fields, finding skeletal remains of civilians in mass graves. The bodies show signs of violence, blows to the skull, evidence of execution. Each discovery reopens the wound. Polish families travel to dig sites waiting to identify bones of ancestors they've never known. And each time the earth gives up its dead, the question becomes louder. Why hasn't Ukraine's government ever formally acknowledged these killings? The number is staggering. Approximately 100,000 Polish civilians. That's roughly the population of a mid-sized city, wiped out over 2 years. In human terms, it dwarfs many atrocities Europe officially remembers and apologizes for. And yet Ukraine has never issued a formal state acknowledgment of the massacres. A Polish memorial at Warsaw honors 6,000 victims from a single region. For Poland, this silence has been the deepest injury, deeper than the killings themselves, because at least a massacre can be admitted and mourned. Silence says, this didn't matter. Your dead are inconvenient. This is what Poland has endured. And this is what Poland is now prepared to make Ukraine reckon with. History shows there is a precedent for this. Powerful nations have forced allies to admit and apologize for atrocities when the geopolitical moment is right. Consider Yalta, February 1945. Roosevelt and Churchill, needing Soviet entry into the Pacific War, negotiated away Eastern Europe. They accepted Soviet hegemony over Poland, knowing the Soviets had committed major killings. Acknowledgement wasn't demanded, it was suppressed, because the military alliance mattered more. Then there's Katyn. In 1940, the Soviet NKVD executed roughly 22,000 Polish prisoners of war. Britain's Foreign Office concluded the Soviets were guilty, but publicly, Western governments said nothing. Churchill assured Stalin the Allies would not investigate. For 6 years after the war, the US and Britain suppressed the evidence. They protected their ally at the cost of truth. But the pattern shifted. On April 13, 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev handed Poland's president a folder of documents confirming NKVD guilt for the Katyn massacre. The Soviet Union finally admitted what it had denied for 50 years. Gorbachev didn't do it out of conscience, he did it because solidarity's rise in Poland and the unraveling of Soviet influence in Eastern Europe made denial politically impossible. The geopolitical collapse of the Soviet sphere had made lying untenable. The pattern is this: acknowledgement is extracted when the balance of power tips sharply enough that denial becomes unsustainable. Is that moment arriving for Ukraine now? Poland doesn't operate like Hungary with public, crude vetoes everyone can see. Poland's leverage is quieter. The EU and NATO requires unanimity. One country can block anything. Poland can also apply pressure through arms transit corridors. Ukraine's defense depends partly on weapons flowing through Polish territory. And Poland can push through parliamentary resolutions, formal statements that carry no legal weight but enormous political weight in a country seeking Western admission. According to research, specific Polish demands on UPA acknowledgement have not been formally documented. But the leverage is clear: EU membership, NATO timelines, and military aid flows all pass through Poland. Ukraine can't get into the West without Polish consent. The strategy is plausible deniability. Poland doesn't issue ultimatums. It delays. It raises procedural objections. It hints at historical grievances in private meetings. And Ukraine, desperate for EU and NATO membership, understands the message even if it's never formally stated. This is how quiet leverage works. It's more durable than open vetoes because it can't be called out directly. It doesn't get voted down. It just lingers. And every day it lingers, the pressure on Ukraine grows. Zelensky's government faces a trap with no exit. If Ukraine acknowledges the UPA atrocities and apologizes formally, it risks fracturing its own nationalist coalition mid-war. Ukraine is fighting for survival. The narrative that has sustained the war effort depends partly on a strong Ukrainian identity which, for many Ukrainians, includes venerating the UPA as freedom fighters. Asking the country to admit the UPA committed genocide against Polish civilians means destabilizing the historical mythology that's holding the nation together in its darkest hour. But if Ukraine refuses to acknowledge the massacres, Poland can simply slow-walk EU and NATO approval. No formal condition is needed. Just delays, just procedural objections, and Ukraine will be frozen on the brink of Western integration, bleeding and desperate, watching the alliance fracture over a dispute most Europeans don't understand. According to research, Zelensky's government has not issued a formal position on UPA acknowledgement. The dilemma is implicit, not stated, but the calculus is brutal. Satisfy a domestic constituency of nationalists, or join the West and lose Polish support. There may be no third option. Ukraine fought the Soviet Union for decades for the right to exist as a nation. Now it may find that existing as a nation means denying part of its own history, not because Russia forced it, but because an ally did. The tensions are mounting, and they're becoming visible. Exhumation disputes are emerging. When Polish teams uncover mass graves in Ukrainian territory, questions arise: whose bones are these? Do they belong to Polish victims or Ukrainian nationalists? Who controls the dig sites? Polish researchers report obstacles accessing burial grounds. Ukrainian authorities, sensitive to the political implications, are cautious. The disputes are framed as procedural disagreements, but both sides understand the stakes. Memorial ceremonies have been blocked or delayed. When Poland's government attempts to hold official remembrance events for Volhynia victims, permission is sometimes denied or restricted. The ostensible reasons vary: security concerns, logistical issues, permits not granted. But the pattern is consistent. Poland wants to honor its dead in Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine's government is making it difficult. These aren't yet open conflicts. They are friction points, but they are accumulating, and as the dispute stays unresolved, they risk becoming flashpoints. In Poland, right-wing political parties are weaponizing the issue. They're demanding the government take a harder line. They're framing Poland's patience as weakness. And that domestic political pressure on the Polish government only increases the leverage Poland has over Ukraine. The more Poland's own nationalists demand acknowledgement, the more Poland's government has to deliver it. And Ukraine knows this trap is tightening. Watch the leverage Poland holds over Ukraine. Hungary's EU vetoes are crude and public Hungary blocks, and everyone knows it. Poland's leverage is structural and embedded: EU membership, NATO expansion, military aid flows. All of it passes through Poland. All of it requires consent. And all of it can be managed quietly, without ever announcing a formal condition. That gives Poland something Hungary doesn't have: deniability, the power to hold things up without being called out for holding them up. But does acknowledgement actually heal the wound? The Gorbachev case suggests yes. When Gorbachev admitted Soviet guilt for Katyn in April 1990, it triggered a cascade: formal apologies from Russian leaders, joint memorials, Polish-Russian rapprochement. The admission was partial. Gorbachev blamed Beria rather than the entire Soviet political leadership, but it was a starting point. And crucially, it coincided with Solidarity's rise and the Soviet collapse. Acknowledgement worked because the geopolitical collapse of the Soviet sphere made denial impossible. Truth became possible only because the power structure that had required lying was crumbling. But the flip side, acknowledgement doesn't always heal. Germany's silence on the Armenian Genocide during WWII is one case. Another is the Yalta concessions, the fact that Roosevelt and Churchill negotiated away Polish sovereignty was never formally acknowledged as a betrayal. Poland suffered it, but the Western allies never apologized. The pattern suggests this. Acknowledgement works when it's accompanied by reciprocal concessions from the other side. Gorbachev admitted Katyn, and solidarity gained legitimacy. If Ukraine admits UPA atrocities and Poland responds by clearing the path to EU and NATO membership, that's a deal. But if acknowledgement is extracted and then no concrete benefit follows, the wound stays open. This is what Zelensky faces, admitting history for a promise that may not materialize. So what's the likely outcome? Research suggests that, without formal resolution before ceasefire negotiations begin, Poland's quiet leverage could become a breaking point. Ukraine needs Western unity to pressure Russia toward a settlement. A fracture in Polish-Ukrainian relations visible to Moscow and to Hungary, which has its own disputes with Ukraine, would signal weakness at precisely the moment when strength matters most. The resolution requires both sides to move. Ukraine must accept the political cost domestically of admitting UPA atrocities. Poland must signal in return that admission will clear the path to EU and NATO membership, with no further conditions and no delay. That's a reciprocal deal, acknowledgement for integration. But if Ukraine refuses, or if Poland extracts acknowledgement and then delays membership anyway, the coalition fragments, and when the Western alliance fractures over a historical dispute most Europeans don't understand, Russia wins, not militarily, but diplomatically. Ceasefire negotiations become harder. Ukraine's leverage weakens. The irony is that both sides are rational. Both understand the stakes. But rational actors can still fail to cooperate when the mechanism of trust breaks down. And history, the very history that's dividing them, suggests that once these wounds open, they are hard to close again. This is the real cost of 80 years of silence. When the moment comes to speak, neither side may know how. The bet Poland is making is that Ukraine's desperation runs deeper than its nationalism. Like and subscribe if you want to follow what happens next, and I'll see you when the verdict lands. I'm David.